from the Penn Libraries.
Gears now to talk about technology use outside of the classroom. Marybeth Gasman is a professor of higher education at Penn GSE. I've had the great honor of actually being in Marybeth's class, which is a very important moment for me. Let me just pull this up. Okay. So what I remember working incredibly hard, doing a ton of reading, having wonderfully meaningful conversations, learning more than I thought possible each week. I also remember during each class, zero technology was used. I don't think the classroom projector was turned on once the entire semester. So Marybeth will be talking with us today about how she uses blogs and social media outside of class to engage her students with course material. I'm going to turn it over to Marybeth.
I'm going to time myself, okay? All right. Okay, I'm not going to use any technology, just for fun. I'm Marybeth. I have a huge amount of energy, so if you don't know what to do with it, my apologies. Anu is right that the first thing I say to my students, I teach history of American higher education, and the first thing that I say to my students is that from the moment they step in the door until the moment they leave, they are not allowed to use a computer, a tablet, or a phone, or any kind of technology. This almost knocks them off their feet. They don't know what to do. I've written pieces in the Chronicle of Higher Education about my views on this. It is the most beautiful 2 hours I can spend a week. It is beautiful. It is beautiful. It's a beautiful conversation. Oh, it's so lovely. And so I don't use any technology. And that's not to say that I don't use technology. I love my MacBook Air. I love my phone. I use Canvas. I use technology, but I just don't use it in my classroom. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what I do outside of the classroom, because I think a tremendous amount of learning takes place outside the classroom. And so I'm going to talk about social media. I'm just going to use, because we got 10 minutes, I'm going to use Facebook as an example. But I also use Twitter and Instagram, and I mean, I don't know what LinkedIn is, but I use it. But all I knew is everyone endorses me for things I don't do. I use all different kinds of social media. I mean, I have a 15-year-old, so, you know, I have to be pretty cool. So a couple of things. First of all, I study race in America. I'm very social justice oriented. I care about race, class, gender, sexuality, issues like that. But primarily, I focus on race. So that really plays a part in the way that I use social media outside the classroom. So I'll talk about that. I love teaching history of American higher education. I do. I love teaching it. And I teach them all about the history of American higher education from a variety of perspectives. But my main goal in that class is to teach people to live for something larger than themselves. That's all I really care about. They're all going to be practitioners. They're not going to remember everything I taught them, but they will remember to live for something larger than themselves. And so that is what I use social media to do. I want them to learn how to use their voice. So I want them to learn how to write. I want them to learn how to talk. I want them to learn how to take a stand on things that are meaningful to them. Not everything, right? We got to pick our battles. So not everything, but on things that are deeply meaningful to them. And so I urge them to use social media, especially because I know this generation. Again, I have a 15-year-old. But I really try to stay in touch with people who are a little bit younger than myself. It's really sad when you figure out that you could be their mama now, okay? So, what I do is I model that behavior with my social media accounts. I pretty much do the most daring modeling on Facebook, because I feel like that's a good venue for me. I will model some of that on Twitter and other forums, but I tend not to be as daring because I think that Twitter is a little bit more open. And so with Facebook, I've got about 3,500 friends on Facebook. I don't know all of them, but they're people who know me, and I feel comfortable with them. And I would never say anything on social media that I wouldn't say right here in public, or to anyone for that matter. And so what I do is I try to live in a way that's consistent with my research. I personally have a huge problem with faculty who do research in areas like access and equity and equality and race and all of these different things, and then they live a completely different life. So I think it's really important that you live the life that you say that other people should live. And so I demonstrate that life. And so that means that if something happens in Ferguson, right, Missouri, that means that I'm going to take a stand on it. I'm going to take an educated stand. It's going to be rooted in history, but I'm going to take a stand. So not only will I probably write several blog posts, because I write for a whole variety of venues, but I'm also going to take a stand using social media. That means that people might disagree with me, and that's okay, as long as it doesn't get to be hateful, which I would never tolerate anything like that. That means that when national leaders do things, and these all connect to my research, by the way, I'm never going to step out of my research areas except for one thing, and I'll tell you what that is. I'm never going to step out of my research areas because I learned a long time ago that to speak out on things you don't know anything about is really silly. So I do history of race in America. So if national leaders are doing things that disenfranchise people of color or low-income people, I'm going to speak out. So recently, the Koch brothers, who I really didn't pay much attention to, gave a donation to the United Negro College Fund, and with the stipulation that they could select, they were on an advisory board, and that they could help select the recipients of the scholarships. I have a problem with that, especially as someone who studies white philanthropy and its control of black education. So I wrote an op-ed, I spoke to the media, and I posted about it for a while on my Facebook page. I got people to think about this. I engaged a large conversation with students of my own, but also mentees all across the country. And so that's what I do. With the Ferguson conversation, I would connect that to history. I would connect the Koch brothers conversation to history. And then I also talk about issues of integrity. I think that it's really, really important that faculty have a sense of integrity, and that faculty share that sense of integrity and that sense of the greater good with their students. And so I often will talk about those kinds of things, what it means to be a good student, what it means to be a successful faculty member, because I'm mentoring a lot of PhDs as well. So all of those kinds of things I'll share, and I engage people in conversations. And I have really great conversations with students over social media. And then the last thing I talk about is I talk about raising a 15-year-old girl, because I know a lot about it. And I came from a family of 10, and my mother came from a family of 21, so I only had one. But I know a lot about child rearing because of a long history of this. And I have a particular way of raising my child. And one of the things that I thought about is that there are lots and lots of young people who are interested in being faculty, but are not sure how they're going to balance that. So I've written a lot about how you balance that, and I share that on social media. I'm very open about my relationship with my child. I don't hide the fact that I happen to be a woman. I don't hide the fact that I'm a mother. I can be a researcher, but I can also be these other things. And I want my students to realize that you can have a balanced and well-rounded life, and that you can also spend some time fighting for justice. Because I'm not sure why we're on this earth if that's not what we're doing. If we're not making positive change every day, I have no idea why we're even here. So for me, using social media allows me to have this amazing engagement with students. And I don't care if they disagree with me. Like, as an example, I'm pro-choice, but if someone is pro-life and they feel strongly about that and they have an educated way of, like, they use research to be able to argue that point, I would support them arguing that point because I believe in the freedom of speech. And so I'm not going to dictate what someone thinks, but I'm going to push them to think differently. And I invite students to disagree with me. And a lot of times what I say on my social media comes back into the classroom, and people want to know why I said that, and I'm willing to engage them. But I'm not going to tell them what to think. I just think that they need to be critical thinkers. And I also have had many times where something I've said on social media has turned into an independent study with a student. Because they're like, oh, well, that's really interesting. Could we explore that idea further in an independent study? Sometimes that has turned into a published paper for that student. In fact, probably about 10 or 12 times now. And so I'm really open to that engagement. For me, I guess learning outside the classroom has to do with getting people to sometimes change their minds. It also, I want to get them to push themselves to think a little bit differently, to grow. And then I want to push them to action. And so that's what I'm doing with social media. It was interesting earlier. Gwendolyn asked me, she's like, "So are you really out there?" And I said, "Yes. There's really nothing that I wouldn't say right here in this room, or in a faculty meeting, or probably anywhere else that I wouldn't say on social media." So that means that I'm not going to go crazy, but I am going to be myself in all venues, because I think it's important to be true to yourself. Now, keep in mind, I realize that I'm a tenured full professor every day, okay? So I realize that every day. So I wouldn't encourage my students to go crazy. Not that I think I'm crazy, although I have some Facebook friends in here. So, but what I would encourage them to do is, if they feel strongly about something, I think that it is important to take stands on things and to pick your battles. And so those are things that I share with them, and I try to model a life that includes that kind of fighting for something and living for something beyond myself. So there you go. That's my use of technology. Thanks.